All right, so let's get started. Thanks for coming to Raising the Standards of Curriculum Design Using Generative AI. So if I just want to quickly introduce the topic today, and then we'll do some sharing of resources we have, and then we'll get started with the actual content. So today's content is really about unit plans, being an educator writing new plans, and how generative AI can be used as in that sort of context. And so that's basically what we're going to be talking about today. So like I said, we do have quite a few resources to share with you before we actually get started on the content. And so one of the main resources, of course, is our parent company, Feria Education Group, which hosts and sponsors our events today. So it's our flagship products. There will be ManageBac, Open Apply, and Schools Buddy, which are probably familiar to most of us. An LMS and admissions software and some transportation busing platforms. But we also have it's an expanding world in Feria. So we have lots of other aspects. So take a moment to look at Pomoja or Oxford Study Course, and of course Atlas. So thanks to them as always for supporting the learning in our general communities. All right. So who are we here today? Like I said, I'm Adam. Actually, I don't think I mentioned that. Yeah, I'm Adam. I'm the director of Schools Technology Director. And here as a former customer, I was a longtime customer at Feria Education with Feria Education Group products, and I was asked to join about 2 years ago as in this role, which is really about helping some of the more technical individuals in schools with solutions. So schools technology, is a combination of working with schools and working with technology. It's an interesting job. And joining us as a guest is Diane Smith, and she can introduce herself first, and then yeah.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Good to have you here. So just a little bit about my background. I've been involved in the MYP for about 20 years. 13 of that was as an MYP coordinator at an IB Continuum school. And then I was working and still work with schools and individual teachers around the world as an independent consultant and PD provider. So I've also had many different IB Educator Network roles, from site visitor to workshop leader, workshop and teacher support materials developer, and a guide reviewer. But what spurred my interest in generative AI was predominantly, besides the fun of it, was my role as a building quality curriculum senior reviewer and reviewer from the very start of the service. So what I found was that over the years, the nature of the strengths and the growth areas of unit plans both changed and stayed the same. It seemed like since the unit planning video series was published on the IB's Resource Center, the structure and clarity of unit plans improved, but there continued and still continue to be gaps in understanding the pedagogical elements of teaching and learning in the IB. So when ChatGPT came out, I wondered if it might change that. Like, could it make a difference in the understanding of the pedagogical elements? And in the last Building Quality Curriculum session, there were quite a few AI-assisted unit plans submitted. And I noticed that there were more details and it was clearer organization, but the gaps in understanding still remained. Not many of the unit plans that were generated by AI, that were obviously generated by AI, did better than a beginning level or maybe a using level. They just didn't have that depth of understanding showing. So I'm really excited. I did a lot of thinking about what is missing from these unit plans, how could it be overcome? And so I'm excited to be part of this conversation to share observations about the limitations and also the potential benefits of generative AI tools in unit planning.
That's excellent introduction. Yeah. Just to piggyback on that, that's actually how we got connected. Was you were talking to some colleagues at Feria about what you were noticing in your experiences, and I was I'm not connected to curriculum development that much. I do more technical solutions, and I think about technology. But I was noticing the same thing, but from a different vantage point. It was I call it the turnkey solution. Like, it was like they're using prompts to build a answer and then copy paste. And so that's where we connected, where, you know, because we wanted to, you know, share it. We wanted to have a webinar about, wait a minute, you know, this is technology is happening, and like we should get out the word about, like, you know, how this can raise our standards, right? This is the topic here. You know, we can use unit plans with generative AI to be even more effective, more resourceful, save time, but also, like, you know, develop our own resourcefulness as an educator. So yeah, so that's the topic today. So good, very good introduction. All right, so the content of, just to break it down into sections and understanding what's going to happen, I'm going to take a turn about what do we need to understand about generative AI in schools. I have a kind of a talk about mental models and understanding how generative AI works in the school and how it can, how to understand how to use it. And then we'll switch over to Diane. And we did practice a new feature in Zoom, which remote controls. So we're all excited in that little transition there. And she'll be talking about what does she look for in an authentic unit plan. So I asked her basically, no matter how it's written, whether it's handwritten on a piece of paper or typed up with generative AI or whatever, what does she look for in something on an authentic, well-written unit plan? And I learned a lot from that. I wish she had been my MYP coordinator. No offense to Phil. So it'll be valuable content just for that alone. And then if we have time at the end, we can do a more explicit demonstration of, like, you know, actually using ChatGPT, you know, in front of the audience. Okay, so yeah, that's the content. So let's get started. All right, cool. I'm just going to get myself situated here. Yeah, so to start off, mental models. This is a phrase that maybe you've not heard before, or maybe you've heard it and I use it in a different way. So I just want to explain what I mean by mental model. Sometimes we call them frameworks or understandings. I think mental model is a really good phrase that I found in my work as more of a technologist. When we talk about mental models and technology, what we're talking about are how we understand our tools to be, how they work. Like, it's an understanding here to understand what is going on with the machine. And that's a mental model, right? So, and it's been my, from this vantage point, working with a variety of educators and technologists, it can be a differentiating feature for someone to be more effective at using software, using tools, is if they have a mental model that sort of matches how it works. Mental models aren't meant to be accurate. They're meant to be useful to the person who has the mental model to understand how to use the tool better. But the closer and more accurate the mental model is for the actual tool being used, the better off. So a mental model that is probably the most popular common one would be that with generative AI anyway, would be that the generative computers can now think. Like, it's what is generative AI? How do we understand that they can now think? So that mental model is not very accurate. So if it's how you're approaching using the tool, you're not going to be as effective if you have a different kind of mental model, more accurate one. And I will talk about what you know, I have a mental model, and so I will explain that in this content here. So I'll say that kind of for the end, but I want to talk through mental models in general, and so we understand what they are. All right. So on that theme of mental models, so in this vantage point, I can help you to understand what's the general attitude that schools have towards generative AI, and, you know, what's happening with, and so if you imagine, like, it's very, you know, it's turbulent. This is a picture here of turbulence. So the mental model I have, that where I understand how it's turbulent, is that this is the foreground here in the photo is two rivers meeting, and it's turbulent because there's two rivers that are just, like, you know, swishing around and stuff. So, and in the background, not pictured, are two rivers that are meeting in the middle, right? And one river is the innovation river, and the other river is the emerging technology river. So my understanding of why it's so turbulent is this: you have a technology, generative AI, that's innovative. It's like gobsmackingly awesome the first time you use it, and you're like, wow, right? It's innovative. And there's practical applications, unlike some other technologies where it's like you hear about it's amazing, but like, what are you going to do with it, kind of thing. This is like practical technology. It's innovative. So that's one river. And the other river that's meeting in the middle is emerging technology. So in EDU, a lot of times, like, you think about iPads, we had time to kind of prepare to incorporate that technology into our classrooms. Whereas generative AI, the emerging technology, it was like it launched in February, and like the next day we were started talking about it on social media. You know, the pace of adopting is much faster, and EDU is maybe not the best or most, you know, because we have a certain pace of planning unit plans and having frameworks and doing PD. You know, the pace of a school's academic year means that we're kind of stuck. You know? And so that's how I think of why it's turbulent. And if we so this is where I think a mental model is useful, because if we have a mental model to understand the phenomenon, then we can break it down into, and then we can kind of adapt to it, because we understand it better. So that's a good understanding of a mental model, but it's also kind of sets the context of where are we. It's quite a turbulent year for some. And some schools have taken the turbulence as just an excuse to ride a wave, you know, go surfing and like, yeah. And others are taking maybe a different approach where like, wait a minute, I just wish it would kind of settle down for a while so that I can come back to it. So I see a variety of attitudes or responses to the attitude of the turbulent, to my sentences aren't making as much sense as they were. I'll slow down a little bit. So the school's response to the turbulence has a lot of variety. So, all right. So again, with this theme of mental model, I'll come back to generative AI and understanding. So there's a perception that generative AI as a tool for curriculum development. So the perception is that generative AI is a master chef in the back kitchen. You just pull it out of your pocket. You can sit there and type a prompt. And all you have to do is kind of figure out what right prompt to use. Maybe some prompt engineering. Maybe that's a new term to you as well. But you know, you phrase it in a certain way. You hit submit, and then it's like getting a plate of from a restaurant with perfectly balanced taste. The presentation's amazing. You know, there's this assumption that the mental model of being used a lot of times with generative AI is that it's like the skills are like a master chef. You know, this is again an instance where we're kind of personifying, we're putting human qualities into a machine, whereas it's just a machine. A machine is this generative AI. The mental model for it, if your mental model is that it's like a chef or it's like has a human intellect, it's able to go into the pantry and you ask it a question. For example, I want to do a unit plan on ancient civilizations. I want to cover this concept. I hit submit, and it's like the master chef goes into the pantry where it has all the internet's knowledge, and all it has to do is find the right piece of information and get back, and here it is. So that mental model contributes to the perception that generative AI for tooling for certain kinds of questions like curriculum development, unit plans, creative or complicated, complex tasks can be faulty. If that's the mental model you go into it, that's the kind of response you expect to get from it. But you're actually not going to be surprised. It's not doing that. It's not going to be able to do that for you. It's not going to be able to make a perfectly presented meal like you see here. So what is the reality then? So I have a mental model, a visualization for the reality when it's used as a curriculum for something complex, like a unit plan. It's like leftovers. Okay, it has elements of a perfectly prepared fresh meal from a restaurant, but it's been reheated. Maybe it's been eaten halfway, and so I think that's a good way of having an understanding of what generative AI is good at and what maybe not so good at. So it's capable of producing food, consumable food. But if you're looking for it to do something sort of like, where you're going to save so much time because you don't have to do any of the hard work of, using your professional judgment, that's where we're going to have trouble. And that's something that me and Diane have talked about, and making sure that we have a good understanding for your educators on how to approach generative AI as a tool for curriculum. So just to back up a little bit, how to understand what generative AI is good at and what it's not good at. So generative AI is very good. I've been saying before, it's not good at curriculum or creative things, but it's very good at things that are well, I want to describe that with an analogy, like again, my mental model. What's it good at? It's good at things that are shallow, like in the shallow end of the pool. You can see the bottom of the, how much depth there is. There in this photo here, there's like boundaries. It's clear and defined. It's the shallow end of the pool. So generative AI is good when you have well-defined boundaries that the prompt can make visually clear. The prompt itself can be very explicit about what kind of output you're expecting from it. It's very good at that. All right. So I was using it last night, and I'm a coffee nerd, and I learned to roast coffee. And I had learned to roast coffee years ago before generative AI. And I learned to roast coffee the old way, which you go to blog posts and you learn, like finding resources. But I thought to myself, what is generative AI going to say about coffee roasting, in this age? And that's an example of something shallow. Like I'm giving it like, what are the steps for coffee roasting, and enter, and it gave really good result. But that's because it's like a shallow result. It's when you go into the deep end of the pool where like the depth is undefined, the boundaries are less, and you get more sort of creative tasks or something where you use professional judgment or human intellect. When I do think unit plans is part of that, I would call which is what makes unit plans so interesting. There are things that it needs to have. There are certain there are certain structures, but in my next slide I'll explain what makes them complicated. So that's my mental model. Like what generative AI is good at are things shallow, and what it's not good at is stuff on the deep end. But if you ask it for something creative output, it's going to give you a response, but this response is going to be shallow because that's what it's good at. So that's how I think of it. So you can ask it to go into deep end, but it's going to give you back something shallow. And if you stay with a shallow end, it's going to be more useful. It's kind of the sweet spot. Okay. So what I mean by like unit plans being complicated and needing human intellect and things like that is just kind of a thought experiment real quick, right? Like if you have a unit like in ancient civilizations, and you had 3 possible unit plans for that topic, and imagine you got them off the shelf or something, or Diane wrote 3 of them for us and we evaluated them, and we went through them. There's a good chance that when we evaluate them on these rows, that some of them are going to be much better at particular ones than others. For example, if you have 1 unit plan for this particular context, it might be really good for assessment of appropriate tasks, like really nail it there, but it might not be so good. That particular unit may not be so good at having a real world purpose. And so that's what I mean by, that's what makes unit plans so interesting. It's a balance between all these different evaluations that we need to make, which is essentially which makes it complicated. There's also like the student readiness, which is a big part of, because we're the teachers in front of the kids and we know them. So how would we possibly put to a machine what students are ready for? That whole concept is something complicated and difficult to, it's like that deep end stuff, like I was saying before. Yeah, so that's how I think of that. So finally, I do want to give you, I've sort of talked a lot about how not to think of generative AI. And so how do I think of it? And this is my mental model. It's not thinking, it's statistics. So when you're making a prompt, you're filling your hand with dice. So every idea that you have, you're filling with in the prompt is another die. And each concept that you're adding to the prompt could have several responses to it. So like in a unit plan context, maybe you give it a concept that you want it to handle. You say, I'm making a unit plan and I want to cover ancient civilizations and I want to use this concept. That concept will be one of the die in your hand. And the longer the prompt is, the more die goes into your hand, right? So when you hit submit and the machine has to generate a response, in my mind, what's happening is that you've set up which die, and then you're rolling. And when you roll, just like in real dice, it's weighted, right? And then how the result comes out based on whether or not it's a 6 that comes up or 2 depends on like the die hitting each other in certain angles, and then it ends up being like, in a real die game, they're equally weighted because it's supposed to be fair. But with the difference here with prompting is that each idea that you have, the machine, being a machine, has to put a certain weight onto each idea that you have. And so when you roll it, the weights in the die, if you think of it, the weighting is not equal. It has to put a weight onto whether or not 6 is more likely or 2. So if you have the example of unit plan with concepts and you choose the particular concept for the prompt itself is going to make the die change the weighting to not be equal. It's going to give it more likely so that when you roll it, it's going to be more likely produce a result. So that's how generative AI is working in my mental model. It's like rolling the dice. It's just statistics. It's not able to go back into a database or look up and find information. It doesn't know anything. It's just doing statistics. It's basically, I even hesitate to say the word guess in my mental model, because guessing is a human, it's just like the weightings on each die, right? When you roll it in midair, it clangs against each other, and how it clangs, it's more likely to give you a 6 than a 2, or how, depending on how it's weighted. But it still could be a 2. Like, you still could get a less likely result, even though the weightings were made to favor a 6. It could still come up a 2, because that's the way it works, right? There's a certain amount of randomness, and so that's what generative AI is. So you could use generative AI to get really great results. I was saying before about the coffee explanation, and it was that coffee one. I said, what are the steps to roasting coffee? There's roasting, coffee, these are all die. And then it because of when I roll it, it sort of knows how to give you the most likely result based on what it's seen before. Those weightings are how it works. Those weightings is the trick there. But when you have something creative, the weightings are going to be ambiguous. It's just going to have to kind of guess what the weightings are, right? And so you're going to end up with different kinds of results. And so that's basically the approach I have and understanding for a mental model.
Okay, so Adam and I both like metaphors, so we'll try to get a little more focused on unit plans in particular. But given all those limitations of having it be leftovers and kind of randomly weighted dice, can it be an excellent asset in unit planning? And the answer is yes. And we're going to get into some of those ways. First of all, we need to think about what is it that makes a unit plan rigorous, relevant, and authentic? What are those things that I could look at a generative, an AI-assisted unit plan and think, okay, that was AI assisted or maybe fully done compared to a teacher that created it. But in thinking about how it can be helpful, we need to think about what the purpose of a unit plan is in the first place. So just take a moment to try to think, why are teachers expected to create unit plans? So I know that a lot of schools have that as a requirement. So just think inside your own mind, because in the MYP in particular, why do you think it is that it's a requirement that teachers create unit plans? Think about your why. Why do you do it? And then,
My fault. And then.
So then we're going to consider in the future what the purpose is intended to be. But before we do that, it can be helpful to think about what it's not, kind of like what Adam was saying previously, because those beliefs sometimes are at the root of unit planning resistance that many teachers feel, oh, it's too complicated, it takes too much time. What is that resistance? So if unit planning is not valued to begin with, the use of AI to help create them is going to be really limited. So what are some things that it is not? Go forward. So go forward. It is not unnecessary busy work that just needs to be completed because somebody says you have to. It's also not some a finished document that's supposed to include every single thing about a unit and then just gets filed away somewhere, never to be looked at again. It's also not a static script, like written in stone, that cannot be changed in response to student needs and inquiries. So all of those perspectives translate to feeling like unit planning is basically a waste of time and energy. And the valuable potential of unit planning can be missed. So we're going to see how unit planning can become even fun, hard to believe, with the help of AI. So what is the purpose? What is the purpose of unit planning intended to be? And who is a unit plan for? So looking at some metaphors, a unit plan is like a sketch. And the sketch is for the artist. It's not for, the public. It's for the artist in the creation of the artwork. Or it's like design ideation And who's that for? It's for the architect, not shared with the client. It's for the architect himself. And then it could be like a prototype. And that is for the engineer, right? It's not for public consumption. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's for the people who are developing their ideas. So similarly, a unit plan is a thinking tool, and it's for the teacher. Okay. And what is it helping the teacher do? It's a visualization tool. It helps the teacher sketch out and get in their mind how all the elements of unit planning go forward, can be woven together in a meaningful, cohesive, and personalized way. And if you're an IB teacher, Adam,
Yeah.
there
slow.
there are a lot of elements to consider. There's the content, the context, the conceptual understanding, approaches to learning skills. How am I going to have student-driven inquiry? How am I going to differentiate? How am I going to have formative and summative assessment? How am I going to work in community engagement and service, right? A lot of elements to just wing it. So a unit plan is this perfect opportunity to visualize that. How are we going to work it together? How are we going to weave it together? And we also have to think about other types of contextual things, like the school mission and values, the school facilities and availability of resources, any other school-based constraints that we have, constraints or focuses. And then that we need to think about the student needs and readiness, the students' interests, and current local and global issues, which might change the whole reason for having a unit, right? So that we can make it relevant. So in terms of unit planning,
It's very slow. Sorry.
yeah, what's happening there?
I don't know.
Okay, so in terms of unit planning, generative AI is great at generating ideas, like Adam was saying. It can provide a seemingly endless number of ideas for teachers to consider. It can save countless hours of research. How many of you have gotten lost down the rabbit hole of Google trying to find some ideas for your unit plan? So it can save countless hours. It can inspire new ways of thinking about a unit, just like collaboration can stretch your mind because other people's ideas are coming into the mix. Generative AI can serve that purpose as well. It can expand your thinking beyond your own past experience so that you can consider other things. So it can suggest ideas that are applicable to all of these areas or aspects of unit planning. But it's not great, as Adam was also saying, at knowing what you know. It does not understand the nuances of your context as a human in your setting, in your school, working with your students. None of that it will has in its memory bank. It's also not great at weaving all those elements of a unit together. Even though we can set it up so that there's a chat string where it can follow a little bit, you have to keep reminding it, these are the elements that we need to weave together so that it all makes sense throughout the whole unit. And that's what is missing from those units where a teacher will just put in a prompt and then it'll stick in content. Then it'll put in a prompt and then it'll stick in, say, approaches to learning skills, or write a statement of inquiry for me. None of those things weave together in those unit plans. They are completely separate, distinct elements. So one of the things to learn is creating a chat string and learning how to guide the AI tool to weave them together. Okay, so what is it that makes a unit plan cohesive, relevant, and authentic? It is you. It's you, go back. It's you, the teacher. It's the process of using your own understanding and insight to consider the ideas that are suggested by a Gen AI tool that can take unit plan development to a whole new level. Without you, it's just as shallow as if you just threw a bunch of random entry points into your unit plan. So in that process, it's important to keep in mind that using GenAI as a unit planning tool, remember that it is not your co-teacher. It is not a colleague. It is not a unit planning expert. So think about it in terms of it being sort of like a bubble. You know, we've all heard of the Google bubble, how it's limited by where you are and what your searches are. GenAI is also a bubble. It's a bubble with patchy internet access. It's been trained in language patterns through whatever text the developers use. And if you're following the news, you can see how some news elements, some authors are refusing to let OpenAI access its material, right? And it's also trained by the input of the users of the tool. I thought it was interesting to hear about back in 2016 when Microsoft was playing around with generative AI, and they created a Gen AI tool called Tay. And what that was supposed to do was to be on Twitter and engage users on Twitter and other messaging platforms and learn from them and to respond to them in a conversational way. They were trying to see if it could learn language. And unfortunately, as you can imagine, on some Twitter accounts, it became sort of a racist, misogynistic bot, and they had to turn it off because it's learning every single time that you are putting things in there. So sometimes I'm trying to give it tips now, like, please do not use this word, right? So just know that it's limited. It is like a little bubble. It doesn't think, it doesn't reason. It's never been in a school. It has never taught your course in your school. It doesn't have your real-time situational awareness or insight into your students. It's just synthesizing and remixing language. So given those limitations, how can GenAI be used effectively as a unit planning asset? We're going to look at that next. Okay, so one thing to keep in mind, like I was saying about the chat thread, it's an iterative process. There's forward, it's going forward, it's revisiting, it's going backwards, it's taking a pause to think. And it can be considered as a value add. It's added to your value as a knowledgeable, experienced, real human teacher. It's not a copy paste endeavor, right? It's an iterative exchange, and copy pasting isn't going to come out with the most authentic results. So we're going to look at a process just in terms of, we're going to use a few examples. So here's an example of identifying authentic context for a unit. Especially in the MYP, we're trying to make learning relevant and authentic. So what would that process look like, that exchange? You're going to come up with a prompt. And like Adam said, prompt engineering is a skill, and there's many, many resources for that. So you're going to have a prompt, and the more detailed it is, the better. And we're going to show you the example in a little bit. But the next stage is that it's going to come out with output. And then you're going to be using your own discretion, your own knowledge and wisdom to consider that output. You're going to ask yourself, are the knowledge and skills included in this entire unit important in this context? Oftentimes, if you're talking about making a context for a unit, it comes very, very tangible. It suggests things that are very, very specific and tangible. And where you want to take it is something that's a little broader and something that can cover the entire unit rather than just one particular focus. Like we were looking at that ancient civilizations unit, and it was suggesting context like, oh, look at the Silk Road. And you can think about how students could explore the Silk Road and how it can be thought about in terms of how cultures and society changes through interaction with other cultures. Well, that might be a great specific context, but it's not going to cover the entire unit, the entire content of the unit. So you need to think about that. And then you can think about, can this context help students better understand and navigate the world? Is it really important? Is it an important concept? Maybe Silk Road is a little too specific. Is understanding the Silk Road gonna help students understand a wider world that they're experiencing right now? So you're thinking about things like that. And then you're doing some prompt engineering, you're changing the prompt, you're giving it more information. Could you make that broader? Could you help? It needs to be relevant to the real world, things like that. So you're changing the prompt. And then there's more output. And then you're looking at it again with those same questions, and you're thinking about how you can eliminate some of the choices it gave you. They're too narrow. You're thinking about, how can I rephrase that? How can I clarify it? And you're thinking about things like considering your students' developmental level, their prior knowledge, what are they bringing to it? What are their personal interests? What is the school setting, mission, and values? A Montessori school is going to want to do something different from maybe a Catholic school, right? You're going to think about that. You're going to think about the unit's time frame and the curriculum requirements. You're going to think about the educational program and pedagogical expectations. And then you're going to go back to prompt engineering, right? So it's going to be a back and forth iterative process. And once you've figured out something that works, you're going to use your professional judgment to come up with an authentic context. Yeah, so it's kind of this whole sequence back and forth. So let's look super quick at another area. So see how it's a whole process that you're going to go back and forth. So then let's look at a different one and looking at relevant concepts. That's something that teachers struggle with sometimes. So it's the same process. It's the back and forth, but you're asking yourself different questions at this point. So the questions you might ask yourself could be, do the suggested concepts provide the most relevant framework for learning? Do the suggested concepts have meaningful and understandable relationships with each other? You're also going to consider the student's prior experience with concepts that it suggests, to consider whether those are the best ones. You're going to ensure that the concepts can be relevantly explored in the context of the unit. You're going to make sure that the purpose of including each concept is clear and meaningful, and use your professional judgment to come up with the relevant concepts. So again, iterative process. So let's just speed race through, because it's the same process for the assessment tasks. So same process of back and forth, but you're going to ask yourself different questions. Does this task allow students to demonstrate a high level of achievement in the assessment criteria? Does it develop a deep level of conceptual understanding? Does the task connect with an authentic audience for a relevant real-world purpose? And you're also going to consider the students' readiness level and prior learning, the differentiated learning and language needs, prior achievement in the criteria, and prior experiences with demonstrating the conceptual understandings. Use your professional judgment, rephrase, make sure it connects with the criteria, and then you'll have, you can have an assessment task. It has so many great ideas for assessment tasks. All right. So what are some questions you might have about that process?
I wanted to actually kind of just reiterate or reinforce, like in the process you see here, the icon is the human with a cog kind of thinking, kind of setting it up. And then in this, you have as the robot next to the human as a partner, as a consultative asset, working on it together. And then at the end, again, it's just you, right? So I think that's sort of the pattern where we're talking about, is like you start off with your own understanding of what you want to do with the unit plan, but then you're using as a consult, you're getting good ideas, but then at the end of the day, you still have to tweak. It's not just tweaking the prompt and just making it produce output that you can copy and paste. It's like you're looking at it and then you're saying, you're being a writer that has ideas, but you're eventually going to have to select what you want to do depending on all the aspects you want to include. So I think that's just to reinforce that. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so let's take a look at the questions. I actually want to address real quick in the chat room, did ask if we're going to be sharing these slides afterwards. And yes, we will be sharing the slides afterwards. And we also will have a recording link. And we also do actually have, I forgot to mention, but we have an article that talks about this. So if Stephanie, maybe you could pop that into the chat room real quick. It talks about exactly the same content, but in written form. So if you prefer to have that as a resource, go ahead and check that out as well. Right, and then we'll send that link as well. So, all right, so let's take a look at the questions. Okay, I see. Stephanie, do you want to talk one
Yes, there is one question. Yes, from Danish Rihan. He says, how can one use generative AI to facilitate each and everything in unit plans?
So is he asking, how do you use it to develop the whole unit plan? Is that what, Stephanie, do you think that's what it means?
I think it means how do you break down? Yes, he says yes, that's what he means.
I guess
that's what it means. Okay. Why don't we, are there more questions? Because I think that looking at the statement of inquiry might give a little bit of a clue on how you develop a chat thread.
Okay. Yeah, I think some of the questions will continue. If we continue, some of them will be answered. So we'll do that. Yeah. All right.
Okay. So not all of you were MYP teachers. And so statements of inquiry might not be needed in your program. However, even in the IB, in the next iteration, the enhanced MYP, statements of inquiry are as a whole, as a statement, are not going to be quite as relevant. It's going to be just one option for how to describe the conceptual focus and the context of your learning. So I think that looking at this sequence can help you see what not only that the teacher needs to understand, but also what you need to help your GenAI tool understand. Okay, so next slide. So when we're thinking about the IB and in particular, so sorry, IGCSE people, but teaching and learning is focused on conceptual understanding. It's developed in local and global context. So two of the basic pedagogical principles of the IB, next slide, is that the statement of inquiry is intended to convey both of those pedagogical principles. So developing it is more of a process of the teacher getting his or her mind around what are we going to use this as a frame, what are we going to use as a framework for the unit concept in terms of concepts, and helping students develop conceptual understanding, and also how are we going to use local and global context to frame our learning process? So the statement of inquiry has these two parts in it. So how are we going to develop that? How are we going to take those unit threads and weaving them together into the statement of inquiry? So let's look at what does the GenAI tool need to, in order to suggest ideas for a meaningful statement of inquiry. It's not going to understand, can you write a statement of inquiry for a unit on ancient civilizations? It needs more information to build in. So what does it need to know? This is a sequence that I would start all of my chat threads when I'm developing a unit in it. You're going to describe its role. What is the role of the tool? You might be saying you are a MYP year 1, or students' ages are 11 years old. You are an International Baccalaureate MYP teacher of this age group, and you're teaching individuals and societies, and we're going to develop a unit plan together, and this is the content that we're going to focus on. Then we're going to look at the context as the second one. Then we're going to look at concepts. Then we're going to look at conceptual relationship. So that all builds into the statement of inquiry. So let's look at what a starter prompt could look like. So it would need to include the subject or discipline, the student's year level or age, the goal and purpose of the whole chat thread that you're going to develop. And then you're going to be putting in the broad topics. What's the content? It could be standards. It could be very clear details, if you have them, about factual knowledge, procedural knowledge, conceptual or metacognitive knowledge that you want to cover in the unit. Or, so here's an example of a teacher that maybe had already taught a unit on Greek theater. Okay, so you're an expert in pedagogy and practice of IB MYP teaching and learning, where you will be developing and engaging MYP Year 1, ages 11, 12, inquiry-based arts theater unit, exploring the following disciplinary content areas. And then you would be putting what you think the basic content is going to be of that unit. This is if you have the content. So you're going to say the general topic, some facts that you're going to be teaching, the procedural knowledge, and some of the ideas. So if you don't have predefined content, you haven't taught that unit before, you're starting from scratch, you're putting in the role and then the outcome goal and the unit length. And then you're saying a very broad content focus, Greek theater, that's what you want to teach. And then you're asking GenAI, identify specific disciplinary knowledge elements, factual, procedural, and conceptual knowledge that would be important for students to explore. And it will lay it out all really organized, and you can pick and choose from that. Your next step would be the context. And the purpose of a starter prompt for the context would be to brainstorm why the world needs that previously described disciplinary knowledge. Is it just to know that students, for some odd reason, they need to know about Greek theater? No, you're going to want to know, why does the world need the student to understand this, whatever it is, about Greek theater? So let's look at the next slide. You're going to say, identify 1 to 2 of the following 6 global contexts in which Greek theater content could be most relevantly explored. And then you're providing this information. It doesn't yet know what the MYP global contexts are. So you're providing a little bit information, and then you're saying, for each of those selected global contexts, identify 2 or 3 explorations, which are more specific aspects of life, through which students could explore, apply, and share what they learn about Greek theater. So then it's going to give you some very, very specific ideas about that. And you're going to consider the responses. You're going to either select one of the examples, but most likely you're going to look at those ideas and have them inspire your own ideas. You're going to describe it in your own words, or you can put more prompts in to generate additional ideas for the context that could more relevantly frame the unit's learning process. So if you are an MYP teacher and your school still is requiring you to make a statement of inquiry, you could identify that more descriptive identification of that context in a succinct word or phrase. So that would be up to you. The next, in that thread that you're developing in your AI tool, you're going to be starting to look at concepts. And you're going to brainstorm which concepts could provide the most relevant organizers for the unit content. So it already knows the content. You've already started it up at the top. And now we're going to move into brainstorming which concepts could organize that content most relevantly. So here's a starter prompt example. And to know this, just like Adam and I are playing with this Zoom new feature that didn't work too well of transferring the slide advancement, you're going to be going in and playing with your starter prompts. So here's a basic one, but you might need to tweak it to come out with better. My starter prompts are changing constantly, but this is kind of a basic one. So you would say, identify 2 to 3 of the most relevant concepts from the following list, which could be used to organize the previously described content related to Greek theater. So you're going to look at some concepts that you think might be relevant, and you could list those. If you're not sure at all, you could list all of them, right? And you could have them pick 2 or 3 out of however many. But it works best if you can kind of contain it and pick some concepts that you think have real relevance to the content of the unit. So then you can tell it, create a table with 4 columns labeled concept, factual knowledge, procedural knowledge, metacognitive knowledge, and then add a row for each selected concepts. In each concept row, list the factual, procedural, and metacognitive knowledge that will be aligned with that concept. This is something that is so revealing. I love this, this prompt because it can really help you understand whether you've selected concepts that really can be explored in the unit. Go to the next. So then you're going to say, you're going to get it to have a prompt that brainstorms potential relationships between those selected concepts. And this is an idea. Identify 2 or 3 of the most relevant concepts from the following list. Oh, wait. We already said this.
I'm sorry, I must have. Okay.
Okay, so this is going forward to be brainstorming, how are those concepts related to each other? How do they impact each other? That's the whole idea behind conceptual relationships or conceptual understandings. It's that, again, it's that, I love that you brought up mental models, Adam, because this is the whole thing about concepts, is that you're helping students create a mental model of how they can sort their content into a conceptual framework or model. So you're going to say, represent 5 meaningful relationships between the concepts, and then you list the concepts that you selected, using a double arrow to show a two-way dynamic relationship and a single arrow to indicate a unidirectional relationship. For each relationship represented, also provide one succinct sentence that uses an active verb to connect the concepts. You can see how specific I'm being here. So do not use the verb to be, because that's more like a definition rather than an active interactive relationship. So don't use the verb to be. Do not include references to specific unit content, because you want these relationships to be transferable to other situations. And then you're going to represent and provide a sentence that describes at least 2 possible relationships between all of the concepts. Another thing to add would be use simple language. We've all seen those word salad statements of inquiry because it's just so complex. This representation and then the simple sentence can give you so many ideas about what are we going to explore in this unit conceptually using this content. Okay.
So I'd like just to point out that you can do that in a prompt. You can tell it to use arrows to indicate, and it's quite effective. So computers are very good at that. Yeah. And
this is a real text-based thing. They can make arrows, but if you happen to be in GPT-4, you can get plugins that can make tables and mind maps and all sorts of things with the plugins. So it's really, really helpful. I've copy pasted a lot of those mind maps into my unit plan so that I can envision what are the relationships between these concepts. So the teacher will consider the responses, select a relationship as the primary focus of the unit, or rephrase a relationship in your own words, or revise the prompt to generate additional ideas. This is that back and forth between you as the knowledgeable teacher and the AI, who has a lot of generative power to come up with a million ideas. Some are good, some are not, and you can use your judgment to pick. So something that it will generate is the relationship between all the concepts that you identify, but it will also identify relationships between two of them. Rather than all 3. Let's say that you decided to have 3 concepts as the organizers in your unit. And that can help you to get more ideas that across the whole unit, you could kind of look for that in student understanding. What relationships are they seeing? And you'll already have some in mind. Okay, and then with all of that information that's already been happening in the chat thread, you're going to brainstorm possible ways that the conceptual understanding and the context exploration could be combined. This is only if you're going to be creating statements of inquiry, which, like I said, they may be soon becoming optional, but you still will need to have students understand the concepts, the conceptual understanding, and then what context are we exploring those ideas in. So here's what a prompt might look like. Combine the conceptual understanding and you put it, and the context exploration and you put it in a single sentence that highlights the importance of both the conceptual understanding and the context. The phrasing of the sentence should be understandable to year level or age students. It should be explorable in other units, in the same or other disciplines, and please use active verbs, not the verb to be. You're reminding it again, you want it to be active. So you can see that that is going to continue on. You're going to move on to, you're going to move on at this point to perhaps the summative assessment. Then you might be working into the learning activities, and then you might be working into the ATL skills. Think in your mind, what does someone need to understand in order, or it doesn't understand it, but it needs the information input in order to come up with the next phase. So as you play with it, you might have to tweak the order of that chat thread that you're creating. But just know that it's that iterative back and forth, and you're considering it, and then you're reteaching it what you want it to know, what you want it to consider.
Okay.
So remember, this is that key point, that this helping students develop that conceptual relationship. How do I understand these concepts and how do they interact? As it applies in an authentic, relevant context is much more important than actually the statement of inquiry. So keep those two things in mind. Like, for instance, you might start the unit. In this unit, we'll be exploring these ideas, the concepts, the conceptual relationships. You might come up with other concepts that are important and conceptual relationships that are important, but we're considering those in terms of this context. So you might be starting your units that way. You're separating out those parts of the statement of inquiry so that you can promote conceptual understanding and understanding those ideas in context.
We'll continue recording, so you can watch it back later. We want to give you a kind of a live demonstration of what we mean, what we're talking about. So I'll have to go into my other. So I'm going to go to ChatGPT, and going to kind of give examples of, like real life examples. So let's do this. Should we do this one, Diane?
Sure.
All right. So, all right, let me just move my windows out of the way. And we do have a few questions we can we'll cover. Great. And one of them was, what are plugins? But we can do that maybe at the end. So I'm going to use the ChatGPT model 3.5, and I'm pasting in the prompt. Let's see. So just to reiterate, you can start a prompt in this way by telling it exactly what kind of output you want from it, by addressing it as you are this kind of person. You are it can be anything. You are a coffee roaster, from my previous example, or whatever it is. So you are an experienced NYP teacher, and you plug in the thing, like I said about the dice that you want to add to your to the prompt. You want to plug in as many things as you can for it to consider. It does help a lot with the prompting if you use these bullet points or dashes, and the machine is much better able to pick up that this is a list of things that it needs to include, just so you know. So like I was saying before, when you want to enter the prompt, to make sure you have like dashes to indicate what exactly what is a list and what to include, and you hit return, you get the result there. So Diane, would you?
Yeah. So like when you look at this at first glance, it looks like, wow, these are a lot of ideas. I think there's another one too for art, right? Context too. Yeah, I tried this myself and it came up with the exact same output. There was one question from someone that I saw, what are the best chat, AI tools that you've found for unit planning? And I have to say, I've tried about 4 different ones, and I have to say that ChatGPT 4 has been the most successful to me. 3.5 has some some glitchy things. Bard, it's really vague on some parts, or it doesn't quite catch the idea. Magic School has been good for certain things, not for creating a whole unit plan in one sitting, but it has some great ideas for individual parts. But let's just, oops.
Okay, I'll go back. Yeah.
Okay, so let's just look at this real quick. Go back up to the one about, this is the one I was referencing about trade routes. Okay, so you're thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. But we need to reconsider this because you're thinking, could this context of trade routes, would that be the context of the unit? See what I mean about it's very, very specific and practical. So we want to broaden it. It's too concrete. Yep. So we want to think about, could that context provide a cohesive and deeply meaningful context of inquiry throughout the whole unit process, throughout the whole learning process? Probably not. Trade routes might be a small part of it. So you really have to sort through all these really interesting, and you might want to include some of the activities in your unit, but you have to sort through those concrete ideas to draw out a more deeply meaningful context. Like, why is it important that students explore that content in order to better understand and navigate the world? What is the core of that? So trade routes might be a valuable part of a unit, but would it make an impactful context for the whole unit? No, it would not. So you have to consider and sort and use your own vision for the unit and understanding of your students. And you might envision a unit that uses trade routes as a starting place for a whole exploration of how interconnections between societies, like financial connections, social connections, governmental connections, trade connections, impacts the sustainability of those societies. So with that context, we might be able to refer back to previous units or lay the groundwork for future units that might also involve the impact of social connectivity. What if that was our context? For example, later on, you might have a unit on the Crusades or colonialism or the Columbian Exchange. And all of those could be tied to thought-provoking present-day considerations for students if we're thinking about societal connectivity, right? How is the Silk Road kind of like the internet? You can get students to think about broader issues than just the Silk Road. Right? So, or we might consider this suggestion in terms of it being more about orientation in space and time and how exchange and interaction breaks down barriers between people. How does it break down barriers and yet build connections? So, societal interconnectivity would be a more meaningful context for a whole unit than this example, trade routes. Right, like so this is an example of how you have to think about it.
Yeah, it's really good at giving ideas, but it's not good at understanding the scope of these ideas.
Exactly.
That's where you have to. So, yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you. I don't know. You're on a roll.
No, there. that's exactly it. You have to understand your program and what is the purpose of contextualizing the learning. ChatGPT doesn't know that. So you can use all these ideas to inform your thinking, and then you create a customized context that's going to take the learning deeper and further.
Okay, so I think that's a pretty good example. Hopefully that will get you to explore. So I think what we can do is we can go to our questions and answer them, and then we can roll out for the rest of the webinar. So like while I'm here, I just want to make sure that someone asked about chat plugins because it was mentioned, and can you make images? So you can actually ask ChatGPT what it's able to do. There are plugins available that extend its ability to do things like make images. I haven't enabled them in this particular one, but there are plugins that you can check out. But that's what it was referred to. There are plugins. There's some for images and some coding ones. but that's what that referred to. And so, yeah, and then let me just stop sharing here so that where's my stop share button? Sorry. I don't see any stop share anyway. Okay, so let's just like go to the questions. There was one good one I liked a lot, Diane. So is it ethical to use ChatGPT or generative AI in the creation of unit plans?
That's interesting. Yeah, because teachers are facing the same challenges that students are. So I did ask in part of building quality curriculum, I asked because it was so clearly AI develop unit plans. I said, should we say anything about this? I mean,
right.
They're like, no, just talk about the strengths and limitations, just as always. So they don't have a policy about that. And what the person actually told me was they don't care. They don't care how a unit plan is developed. What they care about is the quality and that it's actually taught. So some of these, some of the people who turned in their units to building quality curriculum using ChatGPT probably did it in about 15 minutes. 20 minutes. I was doubting that based on what I could see in the authenticity or the lack of authenticity in the units, I doubt they were even taught. So what IB cares about is more, are you teaching according to the pedagogical elements? Is something helping you, whether that be through collaboration with your colleagues or collaboration with a ChatGPT? They don't really care. What they care about is the quality of the planning, the thinking that goes into a unit plan, and also the implementation. Is this helping you implement it in such a way that it promotes the pedagogical elements of teaching and learning in the IB? So, yeah.
Yeah, good answer. I was going to say that ethical, in terms of ethical, if it's being used to generate and copy paste, that's a big difference in terms of ethics from using it in the way that we were saying about as a consult. So I mean, that's food for thought. Ethical questions don't have official answers. I should note also that OpenAI, the company that ChatGPT and other companies, they actually specifically say that using generative AI for for assessment results is actually against their terms of service. So that would inform your ethical consideration. And so, but I think the key is like, if you're not in the loop, if you're not the one doing the professional judgment, it's the machine doing the professional judgment. That's where we get ethical problems, right? Yeah, so
yeah, that's a great answer, right? It's very different to just have auto copy paste than using your own judgment and intuition and insight and wisdom to use it as a resource and then adjust.
Okay, so I think that pretty much covers it from top to bottom. There's still lots of other content if you are interested in exploring more. Like we said, we have the article. And thanks to everyone for coming. I think we went long, but what we'll do is we'll stop the webinar. And but thank you so much, Diane, for spending your time. The email thread turned into such a fluid, interesting and good discussion. It's nice to always collaborate with professionals such as yourself. So thanks for coming. Yeah.
Thanks Adam, and thanks everyone. Yeah, just get in there and play. There's so many free ones: Magic School, ChatGPT 3.5, so many free ones. Just get in and play. Yeah,
and hopefully get your coordinators to let you like a low stakes play like time, and let you explore. All right, I'll give it a go. Someone goes. All right, so mission accomplished, Diane. Thanks so much for coming, everyone. We'll end it right there.